work session, so we're back on. We did recess.
We recessed, so we have to go back in.
All right, we're back in at 1. Thank you. Here we go. And today's afternoon is a comprehensive rezoning work session. And I will turn it over to our acting director of planning, Linda Eisenberg.
Well, thank you all for being here today. I do apologize if my voice gives out on me. And for those of you who don't know, I want to introduce staff, at least my staff. I don't have time to introduce his staff. Mary Elaine has not been before you. She is a comprehensive planner within the Department of Planning. She's been with us for 3 years, but has a long planning career in various local governments. So I wanted to introduce you to Commissioner Boucher and Commissioner Rothstein. And she's been one of the leads on helping to develop the zoning code as part of keeping our concept team, which is our internal working group, in line and on task. So Tom, I didn't know if they had met Clay yet before.
I don't know. This is Clay Black, Bureau of Development Review.
Hi.
Been county for 34 years, various different agencies.
Really?
Yes.
I didn't think it was that many. I thought you were like 20-something.
Yeah, about
8.
34.
Wow, good for you.
You have started about 1986, 33, somewhere in there. Started in permits and inspections.
And then here's Gail Kessler, the attorney on our concept team. So today we prepared a booklet, and the idea is that you'll bring this booklet or notebook with you, give them to your assistants each time, and we will send out materials ahead of time for them to fill in as we go over new material. But the idea of today is to introduce you now to the text. You all have had the text for a while now, and we thought what would make it most helpful is to really just go over page by page with you the zoning text, and we have a companion document that's kind of a brief synopsis of it, and then the actual text itself. So just really quickly, the first page of your binder is, especially since we have some new members, how did we get here? Basically, we have 2 adopted plans. One is recent, and one is almost 4 years old now, believe it or not, when the prior 60th board came into office not so soon, or soon after you adopted the county plan. And then right when that process happened, in 2015, we began reviewing and writing the county zoning code. In 2017, the Planning Commission gave preliminary approval for the commercial, industrial, and employment campus districts. And then last January through March, we had a series of public outreach meetings in each of the commissioner districts going over what is being presented here today. That was when we had this in draft form. And then recently this fall, how our zoning code works is it comes from the Planning Commission as a recommendation to this board, and what you all received in October was what was forwarded by the Planning Commission from their years of work as well on the zoning code. So, as we've said many, many times in many, many open sessions, this comprehensive rezoning will take place in 2 parts. First is the text, so that's what we have before us today. And then once the text is where you all would like it to be, we will go on to the map process. So the next page is just kind of outlining what we're hoping to accomplish with you all today. Is a text discussion reviewing major changes with the commercial, industrial, and the new employment campus districts, and then as well as review the text in detail, and most importantly, go through the use table. And that is how the concept team worked through the text. We started with definitions, making sure things were defined properly, so that way as we moved through the code, we all knew what we were talking about. There was a common language that everyone agreed to. And then many, many meetings and many, many discussions on, even wordsmithing, what does something mean is important in getting this started. So that was really the process followed by this group throughout our many years and months of discussion. And then just finally, this is the website, carrollrezoning.org, and we're going to say anything on the screen just to show you. We have a full website dedicated to this that has all the information you have in front of you today, plus soon to have an interactive map for people, the public to be able to look up their property and have it interactive for the public, as well as all the text as we move through it with you all as well.
Is that push or pull? Just kidding.
So after that little introduction, the first document is summary of use regulation changes by zoning district. Even though you've had the text, this is new material, kind of synopsizing again what some of the major items were. So the commercial, the C1, C2, and C3 is where we started. We talked about principal uses, accessory uses, bulk requirements, and that'll be the same format for each of the categories, so for the commercial and the industrial. Now the employment campus is a new district being utilized. The current employment district is in our county code, but it's never been utilized on the ground, and it's not a traditional district. It's an overlay district that can be applied anywhere in the county. So this changes the way the district is utilized to an actual on-the-ground zoning district. So we're going to talk about that as a new district as opposed to changes being made since it's never been utilized. So principal uses, so in the new commercial districts, because we went from 2 districts, business neighborhood retail, or referred to as BNR, and business general, which we refer to as BG. Here's some of the following changes that were made. Pass-through uses from agricultural and residential districts are no longer allowed, although ag still continues to be permitted in the commercial districts. Certain things will no longer be passed through, like a country inn, and that's a district that we've had a lot of discussions with the country inn and how to utilize that. Individual retail services uses are consolidated into one general category, and instead we're regulating them by square footage.
Back up a minute here. Pass-through uses will not be allowed.
Not all pass-through. Do you want to explain a little bit in depth?
The way the code worked and older codes work, the less intense zones, the uses automatically often pass through to the more intense zones. So what you have is sometimes the commercial or industrial that were intended for commercial and industrial getting ag or residential uses, because the philosophy used to be that you would just go from less intense and pass it all the way through. So what we did was we went use by use by use and debated and decided and researched whether or not that use that is allowed in that less intense zone should also be in the more intense zone, so that it's not an automatic assumption. So certain uses will still be allowed in the commercial, but it's not, it used to be stated that if it's allowed in the ag, it's allowed in the commercial. And a lot of times that's caused problems, and it's also not the best use of, when you have the master plan and you've said something should be commercial or something should be industrial, you envision commercial and industrial uses. You don't necessarily envision what's also allowed in the ag.
What's this do to the process for somebody wanting to change now? Do they have to go through extra hoops to get to that change?
No, you mean if they want a rezoning?
Mm-hmm.
No, I can't see a way that it would affect the rezoning itself. It's simply use regulations, if I'm understanding.
Why don't we go through the actual code, if I may suggest?
Sure.
And rather than the change, I don't know. It's up to you guys, but I think if we go, I get confused.
Okay.
If we
That's
go
fine.
Talk about what.
So, well then so again, just this highlights some of the major changes that we'll be talking about in the code. And you have 2 types of codes. One, the first bound portion is the actual clean copy is what we're calling it. So this is what it would look like as an adopted text. The second bound version is underlined language is new language. struck out language is language that's being omitted from the document, so you can see what the changes are being made. It's a lot. It's over 55 pages, so that's why we wanted to consolidate it. If you want to look through the marked copy or the unmarked copy, we thought the unmarked copy would be easier. What's being recommended, what Planning Commission recommended to this body.
Actually, I'd like to do it the other way. To look at the, so
Okay.
we're putting it in context.
Yes. Okay.
Because right now it's out of context, so
Yep,
this
so
way
would
we
I.
put it in context.
Okay,
So I
fair enough.
appreciate it.
No, that's fine.
So also allow us to ask why you're making that change, seeing
You'll
the
see
change.
what they are.
Right. Okay.
So hopefully you all have had an opportunity to review these. I think most of you have had them for quite some time, and I know I've forwarded it on to everyone. But the first is artisan manufacturing and production. That's new language. We didn't have that clearly defined before. So I guess whatever pace you want to move at, if you want to take time to read each section, then we'll have a discussion.
Maybe it would help to give a brief, and just suggesting a brief explanation of why it's been either added or deleted. And then if a discussion ensues from there, maybe that makes sense.
Sure. The artisan manufacturing and production, this is in some other newer codes as well, and what it does is allow a smaller scale manufacturing and production for the commercial districts, because normally manufacturing is not considered a commercial use, but when you have 3 or fewer employees, this is something that sometimes you see now in the commercial districts. So this was really to make a place for a smaller scale manufacturing. And as I said, when we did some research, it's showing up in a lot of other codes. Are there any questions about that use?
I mean, is this something like Unwind Candles down in Sykesville, where they're making candles and it's, 3 or 4 people?
I'm
I
not
mean-
familiar with that business, but if that's
Is
what
that-
they're
is that
doing,
like
then
a-
yes.
Yeah.
Or jewelry
Okay.
making or stained glass, as it says, those
But if they move
pottery.
from 3 to 4 people, they have to change their,
Then they're considered probably light manufacturing, depending on what else they're
so they
doing.
would have to either move or,
Well, if they were in the industrial district, they wouldn't have to move, they'd just be
Right.
looked at differently.
So this is just a definition, so this will then go into the use tables and into actual districts. So these are just how they're being defined in the code itself, but this isn't the code portion.
Right, these definitions are gonna show up in the code, period.
they're gonna show up, but is that small candle maker,
Yeah.
3 to 4 people,
Right.
now they have to,
Right.
what does that do?
Well, currently, there isn't this use at all, so that small
Would be
candle
incorporated.
maker wouldn't even have that definition applied to him right now. This is to accommodate the need for those smaller
Smaller
manufacturers.
If a business wants to put themselves into Carroll County and they fit within this definition, they will go into a location that's in accordance with this definition.
Yes, where this definition is allowed.
Where this definition is allowed. However, like Commissioner Weaver is, going towards, as that business grows, because they have a vision to go from, a mom and pop shop to 10 employees and whatever, the concern is, would they have to then relocate their business to a location that's now not, that, because this is very limiting.
Some of it, and maybe the business that you were asking about, and Jay can help me out here, that might be primarily a retail business where they're also making the
It is.
candles.
It
So if
is.
it's primarily retail, they could stay in their commercial. This is really something where it's just being manufactured. There could be retail that's accessory to it. But I think what you're describing is actually a retail business where they're also producing some things on site.
No, and you're right, it is, but take that specific out of it, and
Okay.
let's just say a whatever, type of business wants to locate, and we find them good property, good place, in accordance with this definition, the appropriate zoning, to get them in that place. But the concern is this too constrictive, so when they grow, they would actually have to either ask for an exception to the policy or the zoning, or actually physically have to move.
Or say they start growing, are 2
actually-
part-time employees considered 4 employees then?
For that, or to use in manufacturing, it's a permitted principal use in all the zoning districts, so they could stay there.
So they could stay.
Right.
Okay, and that's fine.
I mean, do you put employees the
Well-
number of employees in here? That's a trigger now to, say they have 6 part-time employees or 7 part-time employees, does that now put them over that limit?
So is it necessary to put
Yeah.
a number to qualify the number of employees in this definition? If it's
The
not
danger in not
necessary-
doing that would be if you don't, then somebody who's a much bigger operation that isn't allowed in the C1 or C2 could say, I'm an artisan manufacturing, even though I have 50 employees, and they probably don't belong in the C1 or C2. It
Right,
was
think of
really
it kind of in the reverse maybe you're
Right.
thinking of. Rather than somebody growing, think about somebody large wanting to come into
Right.
a local
And take
neighborhood and put
advantage
something in.
of-
If you don't have that
Right.
cutoff, they're gonna be allowed to
Yep.
go in there. So it's kind of like the reverse of,
Uh-huh.
if they grow, it's like if someone big wants to come in, you really would like to, in normal circumstances, have a cutoff where they aren't in there. They have to look at the higher use zone to put their business in initially. That's, in this case, that's more of the situation. Especially since, as Mr. Voigt indicated, it's all principal throughout all the zones, so that won't in fact impact these type of uses.
Right.
It's the bigger ones wanting to slide into the less intense uses where it's, can be problematic.
Okay.
Makes sense?
I can see putting small companies out of business by putting that in there, though, as they want to grow a little bit and not being able to afford the necessary
Well,
change.
in this case, for that use, it's principal in all the zoning districts, commercial and industrial. So they're already allowed there, so if they did grow to more than 3 employees, they'd still be allowed in that district.
The only difference is they
Okay.
wouldn't be considered
Considered
an
artisan.
artisan
They'd be
manufacturing.
considered
They'd be
just a
considered-
manufacturer or something.
Right. So they change definition, they don't have to change location. Because of the way the use table has been written.
Okay, I'll move on to the bulk requirement. We added height to bulk requirements. Height is usually considered part of bulk requirements. For some reason, it was never in our code as such, and it just really belongs there. We took out volume because it's a very unclear, even amongst all of us, we're not sure exactly what it meant. So since it's not used, we took it out. Are there any questions on that one? Okay, on business park, we currently have a business park that is allowed in our light industrial district, our IR district. We are actually recreating the business park to belong in the commercial zones, and then you'll see as we go, we also now have an industrial park that's more appropriate for the industrial zones. So even though it looks like we're taking that out, we're just redefining it and putting it in the commercial zones.
So it's sort of separating it between commercial and industrial.
Yes.
Making it clearer
Yes.
which is which.
Butcher shop, this is sort of a strange one, but we have a use, food processing and packing, and it was brought to our attention during one of our many discussions that the way food processing and packing is defined, a butcher shop could be included in that, and then those really are 2 different uses. So we pulled it out and made it a separate use, because that happens, the food processing actually happens in a butcher shop. And we also needed to separate it from the general retail in certain cases. Catering establishment and banquet facility, this is a brand-new use. We have them in the county, and this is just acknowledging that we have them. They've probably been considered other things throughout the years. Jay would tell you, when someone comes in with that type of business, he has to try to figure out what's closest. So we actually created the
A
use.
butcher shop, can they kill these poultry on the site, or they can only process them on site?
Just process.
The way this is
That'd
written.
be part of it.
Hmm?
I
If you
think-
bring in a cow and butcher it, you kill it on site.
Part of the process.
It's part of that process.
That's part
I
of,
don't-
considered
If
part
you
of
ever
the
been
processing.
down to Bullocks, I mean, they bring them in the back door and
Yeah.
stun them, kill them. Then
Yeah,
you
I'm
just start from there.
clarifying that, because you could have only processing, I mean, we have to kill them all.
Well, that killing of the animal is part of that process.
Okay, commercial parking lot or garage, this was really just a clarification to what the use is. I mean, we felt that was a very cumbersome definition, the way I previously read. There's really no other reason other than just, that was one of our purposes with redoing the code, was to make things simpler, clearer. Tom, can you explain why we did concrete and asphalt recycling? I'm kind of forgetting, that was,
Well, I don't think we had it clearly defined there that we do have operation, we have one, actually, we had 2, I think we only have 1 now. where that process of just recycling concrete and asphalt takes place. That's all they do. You know, they receive it, they grind it, they repurpose it, and then sell it again. So we wanted to make sure we had it clear that that process was a recycling process. And if it is associated with some type of other operation there, you might have to define which one's the primary use, but we want to make sure that was clearly acceptable there, because it happens a lot these days, recycling processes with asphalt and concrete.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Were you finished?
No, go ahead.
Conference center looks like a new definition, but it used to be a single definition that said retreat center and conference center, and it was allowed in the ag zone. And following discussion, we believe these are two separate uses, and the conference center does belong in the commercial zones as opposed to the retreat center, the way it's described as more of an ag or conservation kind of use. So we just separated that part of the definition out. Declaratory ruling, Jay may want to explain this. We are taking the definition out, but it doesn't really change what Jay does in making this type of interpretation.
What their declaratory ruling is if something doesn't necessarily fit anything exactly in the book, it's up to me to decide if it fits into a category of uses on there. And if so, I would make basically a declaratory ruling and say, yes, this is allowed. It's very similar to this and this and this, so it is allowed.
You have that authority, whether it's
Yes, sir.
defined that way or not?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, currently, like I say, it is in the code.
Yeah.
And it's
Make
referred
judgment
to
calls.
as
No, it's
issues
not.
of interpretation
That's-
elsewhere.
It's in the code, well, it was in the code, but it doesn't carry any
Any weight.
binding legal authority with it, so we removed it.
It's just a ruling that I make. It's not necessarily something, I could have the same situation for somebody else and make a different ruling, possibly.
Right, it's not precedential.
Right.
But what gives, I think the question I'm asking is what gives you the authority if we don't have it?
It's in the code.
Oh, which code, that's what.
It's in the zoning code.
In the
Okay,
zoning
just
code.
not in definitions.
Right.
Yes, it's,
Right.
it's referred to as an issue of interpretation in other sections, so we just left it as that.
Right.
The next two, general retail and general service, were necessary because we took the long, long list of service and retail uses that are allowed in the BNR and BG and made them one category in the table of uses. So in order to do that, we needed to define them. And in the case of service, we wanted to give examples because sometimes that can be a little more unclear. With retail, I think it's pretty clear that it's the sale of commodities or goods. So that was the necessity of defining these two things. Golf course, the reason we are defining it separately is because we consolidated all the outdoor recreational uses into one big category, but golf course is a different type of outdoor recreational use, so we had to pull it out so that it can be regulated on its own.
So, question about that, maybe you, Jay. Most of our golf courses have conference availability or meeting availability, right?
They have, most of them I can think of. I know Chaladon does. They have
In Westminster,
a
they
small hall that they can,
have meeting areas.
meeting areas in.
I just want to make sure they don't get jammed up in the definitions here as to what they can or can't do, because even in the case of like Westminster National, they have 2 floors of assembly
Yeah.
availability there. Same with Piney Branch. So I just,
That would be, you know, you looked at that point probably as an accessory use to the golf courses, because it is common with them.
okay.
I
But
mean, most golf courses that I've been to have had some type of meeting space or a restaurant in them.
right.
So, I mean, that type of thing would be accessory to it.
weddings.
But they're used differently.
Yeah, they should be used.
Okay.
Accessory uses. Like, I have a question, how about driving ranges?
Driving ranges would fall into outdoor recreational. We
Okay.
had no problem with leaving that in there because of the amount of
Oh, I
land
see.
it doesn't use up, basically,
Yeah.
compared to.
The golf course takes up a huge amount of land, whereas a driving range, it's just a couple acres really.
But about the golf courses, the meeting spaces are not necessarily tied to the golf courses. They could be rented out and used for other, like weddings or small business meetings and all that kind of fun stuff. And I know the Miller Center has, rented out Chaladon's space. Yeah, so it's a combination, you know. Are they governed differently, or are they defined differently, or?
I wouldn't
No
define them
need to?
differently, no, they.
Okay.
Same,
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure that those folks don't get jammed up with the definition, that's all.
Right.
Okay.
Well, I mean, does everyone understand principal permitted and then accessory uses? Maybe, I don't know, I don't wanna go down a rabbit hole, we don't need to, but it may be helpful to, because at this point, right?
We could jump ahead. We actually changed the definition of principal permitted, or principal use.
Does that
Yeah,
help?
that's
Yeah.
Well, no,
Or do you wanna wait?
I mean, I've been through all this, I've
Yeah,
been sitting in for the last year.
Right, right, right.
But I'm
sorry.
prompting just a few things, just to engage, to make sure we're familiar with that too.
Right.
So
We have like 1.5 pages
That's
left
all.
of definitions, and then we can get straight into that.
Okay, I don't wanna jump
Well, we
ahead,
also-
but-
We changed the definition of principal use to
You
be
did,
very
right.
clear
Mhm.
that there can be 2 principal uses on a site. And that's been Jay's interpretation, it's been his declaratory ruling in the past. So, this is just legitimizing that practice. So you could have the golf course and the wedding facility as 2 principal uses if it wasn't in fact accessory.
It's just like a gas station. Nowadays, they have a convenience store,
Right.
or a store, they have the gas pumps,
Yep.
and they have a car wash. There are 3 different principal uses listed in the code, and they can have all 3 of them on one site.
Heavy manufacturing and production, this is a definition, again, that takes into account consolidating a lot of individually listed heavy industrial uses that used to be in the code. And this way, in the table of uses, I mean, Jay would make the interpretation if your use falls into this, but that way we don't have to list every possible heavy manufacturing use. And we do still list a lot of them because there are so many that are a little bit complex, so we didn't take them all out, but this covers some of them. Indoor recreational facility is the same thing. We're starting to see a theme here that we've tried to consolidate the long list of uses that we used to have. And this is especially important, I think, for for indoor recreational facilities, because every year that goes by, there seems to be a new indoor recreational facility that comes out, and it's not in our code. Trampoline parks, nobody
Not
heard of
axe
those.
throwing.
Yeah.
I mean, literally.
Do we really have axe?
Yeah, that's a thing.
What is?
Axe throwing.
Axe throwing,
Yeah.
rock climbing.
Yeah. So things you never would have thought of, yeah.
Right, so
Is
now.
there alcohol involved?
There's a few that open up in the region.
Principal permitted use.
Principal.
Doesn't sound good. So, yes, again, this was a consolidation.
Mhm.
in-
Team building.
Team building.
Not for us.
And believe it or not, there are quite a few of them in the county that are indoor activities like that, have multiple uses of that nature.
Right, and they do pop up, like
Yes.
trampoline parks just about popped up.
And there are good adaptive reuse, especially of larger industrial vacant buildings that tend to go, the gymnastics facility, the trampoline park, the Ninja Warrior courses, things like that.
Industrial park, as I said earlier, with business park, this is intended to be in the 2 industrial districts. And there's more about that later in the code, but this is just the definition. We changed the definition of commercial kennel to make it consistent with the Chapter 90 definition, and that was at Gail's request. It will make enforcement easier if the 2 things are identical. We took out landscaping contractor, not because we don't have them, but because it's already included in the definition of general contractor, so it wasn't necessary. And it's never discussed separately elsewhere in the code.
General services, you mean?
I'm sorry, landscaping contractor?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's included in general services?
No, in contractor. That you don't see here, but in the zoning code, there's a definition for contractor that includes
Includes all,
landscape
landscape.
contractor. So it was inside of that already, and it wasn't necessary. Light manufacturing and production is the same concept as defining heavy manufacturing and production. It's consolidating a number of uses. Medical clinic, we have taken out because it is identical word for word to medical center, and which is also defined. The 2 are right next to each other and identical, so in the table of uses and elsewhere, it's called a medical center now,
Yeah.
and never a medical
But if
clinic.
you're looking at light manufacturing production
Mhm.
here, and over here, heavy manufacturing production, each of those uses the other in the definition, but neither one's really defined.
Well, it uses it, but says that it's not the other thing.
Yeah, it says it's not the other one, but what is the other one? Because the other one uses the other one as a definition. So
Well, I
there's no
think the
clear,
biggest-
if I'm looking at that, and I'm,
Kind of goes like this, is what.
yeah,
you're
so
doing.
if I'm, what am I? And who's the arbiter of that? If I'm light or if I'm heavy?
Well, I think the biggest difference is in the first sentence of heavy, where it says that it's a location used for the processing, manufacturing, compounding of materials, et cetera, primarily from raw materials and et cetera. But then, when you get to light, it says,
Finished.
relative, manufacturing of relatively small finished products or parts. So I think that one phrase, I mean, we could work on that if you want us to, but that one phrase is really what differentiates the two. One takes raw materials and makes it into something, and one is
Finished.
taking those already partially made materials and making a small finished
I
product.
say like a lumber yard would be heavy, but the carpentry shop would be light. They take the wood from the lumber yard.
Well, unfortunately, one is, that example, one would be a sawmill, and
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of a.
How about the
Let's do a
tire
steel
maker?
analogy. Bethlehem
Or
Steel's
like a
making
flour mill,
steel.
Help me
and
out,
then a
Jenna.
bakery.
There
like
you
on
go.
top.
Switch products.
Yes, a flour mill and a bakery.
You have like a flour
Gotcha.
mill would be the heavy, but like the Outer Banks Bakery would be.
Right,
the
that's what I was
light.
trying
Right,
to get
yes.
at. All right.
Relatively small, how do you define that? That's a tough one. I mean, to me, relative may be the size of this room, somebody else is the size of that bottle. I mean, that's a tough one.
We actually used to have examples in this one. This used to be longer, and I think we took some things out. We could go back and work on this. If you'd like it to be either examples or more clear.
Kind
I
of leaves
think
it
it's
up,
a
leaves it
Right.
open to interpretation.
ambiguous
That's
term that-
relatively.
That, you know, all of a sudden they come in for that, doesn't want to change to that, and all say, well, that's too big for this. Well, what's relative?
I just think one of the two has to be more clearly defined.
Okay.
Because if
All
you're using
right.
the definition, say, well, light is not heavy and heavy is not light, then one of those two, you have to know exactly what that is.
Okay.
All right, we'll work on that in the relatively. Tom, did you have any?
No.
Let's see, we were on mini storage. The only reason we took that out is we've now redefined it as self-storage facility, which our definition is now more comprehensive, and I think clearer to what the use really is, and you'll see that on the next page. Oil contaminated soil facility, this is consistent with Comar. Tom, can you remind me why we
Yeah, well,
needed
it
to do
is
this?
consistent. They are permitted facilities. So we wanted to make sure we clearly defined them and differentiated them, because they are a Maryland Department of Environment permitted facilities to do recycling of oil contaminated soil. So we want to make sure, and we have one in the county.
Say, yeah.
I was gonna say, that was my next question.
Yes, we have one down in Finksburg that does that process.
No, that's oil contaminated. What about just contaminated soil?
Well, it could be, I think they can receive all, but mostly they do oil
Like
contaminated.
methane.
The other contaminated ones, I don't know if they can be recycled. I think only oil can. You know, like if they're contaminated with
Yeah.
other
methane or
more
something,
hazardous
you know,
materials.
I know what you're saying.
Yeah, I don't think they can be recycled. I think they have to be, or landfilled or whatever, but the oil contaminated can be
Okay.
recycled.
The next definition, the outdoor recreation facility, similar to the indoor recreation facility, we have consolidated all the existing and, but not limited to future outdoor recreational uses. We've renamed the planned business center to be planned commercial center, and this is basically a modernization. We added medical facilities, which often are already in these are basically shopping centers, neighborhood shopping centers. And other commercial uses includes other things. And Clay, I don't know if you want to expand on that, but there's other uses that you see coming through that necessitated us adding other commercial uses, I believe. Or were we just trying to leave it open for?
Yeah, what we were having is, say for instance, it didn't include medical, What we were saying under a planned business center is sometimes a medical office would move in. Well, it was already designed to handle businesses moving in and moving out. This allows more of the uses to move in and move out that are more of the commercial in nature businesses.
And it's really
Yeah.
reflecting what we see. It's
Yeah,
not
it's
like we're
what we
trying
see
to
on the-
make a
what we
change
see on
for
the
the
ground.
future.
It actually put in place what we do see in the actual planned business centers. So if you go out to a planned business center, you'll see a mix of retail, commercial, and medical. And so this just allows it to continue.
How'd you hit on the 3 or more, Clay? Just what's on the ground? Is that the same answer?
That's existing code.
That's the existing
That's,
code.
that's drawn from the existing code.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we didn't want to create a situation where we might, people who have been permitted under this are allowed to do this. If we monkeyed with that, then you could create possibly some non-conforming type situations. So we wanted to be consistent.
I apologize, what was the question?
3 or more.
The next definition is what we had previously discussed, making it clear that there can be more than one principal use, or one primary activity, excuse me, considered a principal use.
I'm sorry, I gave it to you.
Retreat facility, we took out conference center, as I said a few minutes ago, because they are really two separate things, and then we redefined conference center. Self-storage facility is a redefinition of mini storage. We're regulating it pretty much in the same way in the code, but we added to the definition to reflect a little bit more of what we see, and we looked at some other codes and how they're defining it in the industry. The next two have been of great interest lately, small-scale breweries and small-scale distilleries. And what you'll see is that we separated them off. You can still have a brewery or a distillery in the heavy industrial district, but this is a smaller scale operation, and you'll see that we limited it to 22,500 barrels per year of beer and 100,000 gallons per year of spirits, and that is from the state definitions, the state regulations, which we
Okay.
felt
Yeah.
That's,
was.
there
Yeah.
comes the question.
Yes.
Yeah, I had
Okay.
it too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
And you'll
That's a
see
lot
when we
of
get to the
drinking.
use table, we're allowing this in many other locations where you wouldn't have seen the regular breweries and
Okay.
distilleries.
Okay.
Veterinary facility was never defined, and it definitely needed a clarification, particularly regarding the boarding of animals.
Can they board animals as a conditional use of it on the same site?
The definition has it that you can only do it during their convalescence and accessory to the use, but long-term boarding is a separate use.
That'd be a separate use that they would have to apply for and get approved.
Okay. Because a lot of them may gravitate to that as they grow.
And that'd be a commercial kennel.
That would be considered a commercial kennel, and they would have to, in most cases, apply to the board to get conditional approval.
So the Board of Zoning Appeals.
Yes.
Warehouse, we just made a few minor changes just to update it. Took out a few words, added in internet sales. That's how long it's been since we looked at that definition, I guess. And also, we wanted to make it clear this is also what's considered a distribution facility, which is how it's been interpreted, but we wanted to make sure that that's what it was actually saying. And because we defined retail, we needed to define wholesale, differentiate between the two. And that is the end of the definition changes.
Are there any additional questions or discussion with the definitions? And then just to recap, we'll go back and we'll work on the heavy and light manufacturing, making them more distinctive and working on changing relatively to be more defined.
Maybe I just noticed in the outdoor recreation, golf driving or batting range, isn't it a driving range and batting practice cages?
Cages.
And that seems not to be,
I'll check.
it may be zoning wording that I'm not
No, I don't-
familiar with.
Okay.
That
It might be
seems-
a mistake.
Yeah, that's what I'm more, and driving ranges, not golf driving. But
Right.
It seems like something got, that's good. And then Commissioner Rothstein, switching in, so I'm outing you. But, sorry, how about medical cannabis, is that like defined someplace else, or?
That's
Betsy,
already in
no?
the existing code.
Okay, but it,
Nothing's,
There's no.
No
So it
changes
doesn't need to
today.
be further defined
Correct.
in this, is what you're
no,
saying?
it's pretty well defined in the code as it is. I mean, we defined it,
3 years ago?
Yeah.
yeah, about 3 years ago when it first came about.
wasn't this the entire?
Yeah, This,
No.
no,
This just.
It's just a change.
Just changes.
This is just
Right.
the
this
changes
is
to the
just
commercial.
changes in commercial.
Right, so
I
you're
was
not
sleeping
looking-
during that part, forgive me. Thank you.
Just that part?
Just that. Thank you.
Want to still keep going page by page?
Yeah, just want to keep going page by page, is this
Sure,
working
yeah,
for you
that's
all?
fine.
Okay.
Just a quick question. I hate to bring this up, but I'm gonna, don't throw anything at me, Jay, because you're probably gonna. When we're talking about country inns, maybe Clay's gonna throw something at me. Simmer down, Tom. How does that pertain to the new definitions when we talk about conference centers or retreat? Is there a way that we can differentiate now or not?
They're separate, they're two separate uses.
Okay, so suppose I come to you and I'm in a commercial district and I say I wanna open a 4-bedroom wedding facility. What are you gonna tell me?
We haven't allowed that in the commercial. We
Yeah.
just said it was allowed in the C1.
They can see one is all we allowed it in.
Because that would be more
Okay, so-
community
but-
oriented.
more
But
community.
technically, I could call it a retreat or a conference center.
Not, country inn and a retreat conference center, they're two different things. For one thing, a country inn is usually a house with somebody living in it, renting out rooms, just like a bed and breakfast. Whereas a retreat conference center is more meetings,
Day kind of.
day
Not
meetings, yes.
overnight.
But
Not
you have
necessarily overnight.
definitions for all those things.
Yes.
Yeah,
There-
so it's
there
not,
is
it's not
an
arbitrary,
Airbnb.
the definition's cleared out there.
There is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Airbnb, we didn't address Airbnb in this code. I mean, it's,
We may in the residential.
we
if
we
have
may,
to.
one thing about Airbnbs is it's basically the owner of their house renting their house out,
Right.
which
Yeah.
they can do now. I mean, if you own a house and you move out, you can rent it to somebody else if you want. That's basically what Airbnb is, except they do it on a week or 2-week term or whatever. So it's basically just renting out your house. And, it'd be no different than that.
And the reason for the country inn allowed in C1 is because the C1 is our small zone, it's allowed in our rural villages, so.
Okay. It's just, it just gets into the weeds sometimes, this country inn thing.
Well-
That's why.
What happens is, the way it gets in the weeds is because in order to have those wedding type facilities now in the code, you have to have the country inn, all right? And what we're trying to do here in the code, we'll be separating them out. So this begins that process, because you can do the catering establishment banquet facilities as principal permitted uses in the C1, C2, and C3. So you don't have to have a country inn to do them.
that.
All right, so we've started that process of
Okay.
separating it out.
Okay.
We'll complete it when we get to the ag zone and all,
Mhm.
all right?
Got it, okay.
That was a
All right.
good point, thank you,
Okay.
Tom.
Because currently you have to have the country inn in order.
Exactly.
Yes, Gotta have a country inn.
Exactly.
That's where, therein lies some issues.
Right.
You
Reason we're
opening
up
one?
here, right?
You opening one?
No, no.
You got enough problems.
I got-
So the next is just the changing of the names, that's just the table. Again, removing the BG and BNR, replacing it with C1, C2, and C3, and renaming, the IG and IR to I2 and I1.
Are these consistent with other jurisdictions and other codes?
As far as the naming
The naming,
convention?
yeah.
Yes, yes. Actually, I believe Anne Arundel County, they do their commercial, the 1, 2, 3, and et cetera. And same with industrial, we've seen that a lot with the progressing, industrial going heavy or I1 and I2.
Okay, I mean, just to have the ability to have the conversation into other communities, other jurisdictions, it's nice that we're talking the same language, so, okay.
And in most cases, unfortunately, because especially even within our county, each municipality has its own zoning authority. It's not always quite the same. We may be talking about the same district, but they may behave slightly differently, so.
And those uses definitely could be
Yeah, it
different.
could be slightly different,
sure.
so you always
Yeah.
run into that.
Right.
As Commissioner Weaver just was trying to ask was, we're working towards getting commonality and common definitions and sharing with the other municipalities, these are how we are defining them, and it may be in all of our best interests to speak the same language. I mean, just suggestive.
That's certainly a bigger discussion.
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, they're independent
Yeah.
Well, of
entities,
course-
so
no,
of course they're
they
gonna
are.
do what they're,
Right.
but we do share our master plans and
Mhm.
our,
And the
our
towns will
planners.
review this, I mean, that's part of what we do
Yeah,
with
but I
them.
mean, it's always a good thing to have the conversation
Yep.
with them. Okay.
So next is the general use regulations, starting with communication towers. Communication towers and tower complexes are permitted as a permitted use. And just again, changing the wording from all industrial districts to the C2 and C3 and a conditional in the C1 and employment campus. So just bringing the wording up to date with what has been discussed already. Adding the word towers in section 4 and removing as a conditional use in the industrial. And again, just changing things that were IG to I2, and again, just the name changes just to be consistent.
That's the only places a tower can go into?
Jay, do you want to explain a little bit more about the tower since you?
The, currently, everybody knows the phone companies are going to smaller towers. Currently, throughout the county, they are allowed on existing poles, telephone pole, light pole, whatever. And there's no problem, it's just a matter of applying for the permit and putting them up. When they build a separate tower, and there's one over here behind the courthouse, that is still considered a communication tower, and we'd have to go through our whole process in the county, which involves going, sometimes going to the Board of Zoning Appeals.
I think we're up in the northern end of the county, we want to try to get towers on.
Well, like I said,
communication. It may not be C1, 2, or 3.
well, in the code, they're allowed in any district if they're on an existing structure. So if you're in ag and you're putting it on a silo, that's allowed. It's an existing structure. They don't need any other approval for it because the structure's already there. That's the same way, like I say, with telephone poles, electric poles, towers and stuff like that. They're structures and they're in the code and they're allowed on them as a principal use.
Well, so the company wants to expand up into a very remote area, they have to build something.
Right. Well, usually, a lot of times they try to put, like say, put them on telephone poles.
They tried to.
Right, but if they go to put up a separate pole all by itself, the way our communication towers definition reads, they're considered communication towers because the sole purpose for them is for communications. And they would have to go through our normal process like any other tall tower.
How many towers are there in the county, do you know?
Not off the top of my head.
But Commissioner Weaver's scenario, if they went to the BZA, they could get approval to put that tower up if it was
Yes.
hidden off that area. So there's
Absolutely.
Yes, they
still
could.
mechanism for that to
Absolutely. They
happen.
have to go through a process.
They have to go through a process.
So they're permitted uses, correct me if I'm wrong, in the C2 and C3. And they're conditional uses in the C1 and employment campus. They're also permitted uses in the industrial districts, both
Yes.
industrial districts. So the only district that they're not allowed in of the 3, 4, whatever we're talking about today is C1.
Yes.
Does that help?
Yeah, I think we need, just, everybody needs to keep on track here that you're only looking at the
Yes.
commercial, industrial,
Yeah,
employment campus
I know.
districts. So there's other language, that goes with this about those other districts. And that's real important so if you want to deviate from this discussion into the other districts, we need to have other, I keep digging in this code, and the reason you see me doing that is because when you go into the ag zone and all like that, that's in other pieces of the code that are still there right now, which will be for future discussion when that's addressed. So it's, you know, it's okay, we can have those discussions and all, but you have to give us some time to go back and make sure we're providing you the information you needed. But yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, Jay, the only districts where it is strict, you cannot put a tower at this point in time are the residential districts, historic, and the mobile home park, right?
Correct.
District.
Those
So
are the
those are the only
districts.
things where you can't do it at all, all right? Other than that, you can place them, but there may be processes you have to go, additional steps you may have to go through,
So if you,
okay?
basically, if you have an R 40,000 property, it's residential, it's a development, all houses, you would not be allowed to put a communications tower in there.
In that
A ham
area.
tower.
A ham tower is totally different, and it's in the definition, and they're exempt from these regulations for a
Okay,
ham tower.
got it.
Now, in that same R40 district, if you wanted to put it on the telephone pole that's there, that's already there, you could do that. But you couldn't go in and build a new tower just for the cell tower.
But it's allowed in the ag zone.
Yes.
Yes, it is allowed in the ag zone.
So that's sort of, I think, the
Mhm.
answer to your question.
The next category, 158.040, distance requirements. This looks like a lot of new language, but as, with all these new uses that are listed that have to be, 2 times the distance requirement, 3 times the distance requirement, but in fact, this is coming from another section of the code that was deleted. It used to be every use said what the distance requirement was. Here we put it all in one section so that you could look and see. And these are almost all industrial uses. I think without exception, they're industrial uses. We didn't change any of those distance requirements, we just relocated them. And we also reworded to be clear, this has been, I think Jay could probably expand on this. This has been a problem in interpretation for him at times, what some of this has meant. So we really tried to clarify it, and hopefully we did. Does anybody have any questions about that section? I don't want to go into too much detail on it, but
I
it
guess
really
my-
is
my-
just a
My
replacement.
only question is, when I see numbers like 200, 300 feet, and I do not want to believe that they're arbitrary numbers. There's rationale, there's reason. What is that reason? For
199 feet's not quite enough.
Well, in this case,
For
it's that we
200 feet.
didn't change
Yeah.
what the existing code says. We saw no
But, I
reason,
mean,
we have not found it to be a problem. So in this case, I understand what you're saying about the arbitrariness of numbers, but in this case, we kept the same distance requirements because we believe they've been
So we
working.
kept the arbitrary numbers and we just moved
Better.
forward.
Those numbers were picked back when the code was originally started, and it's been that way since the beginning. Why they picked 200, no
Yeah.
idea.
Uh,
That's just what they did.
No, I think that's been lost in history, maybe some. But again, I think some things, and everybody, staff here will correct me, some reasons that we have to be careful with changing numbers and all is creating nonconformities, where
Right.
somebody, had that setback, and if you change that number, it could create a situation where if they wanted to come in and expand or do something, then it would create a problem.
I
So-
agree.
So keeping that consistency, that's one, I'll be honest with you, that's one of the big reasons for keeping it like that. And I understand your frustration at saying, why, and we can't answer why, but moving forward, trying to avoid nonconformities is extremely important, I think, in this whole process. That was one of the number one things we tried to focus on.
For every one of these, is there an exception allowed? They can come for
Yes.
an exception.
They come for a variance, yes.
That's right.
Yes.
Okay.
And that variance can vary. Jay has the ability to do a certain amount of that, and then if you want to exceed that, you go to Board of Zoning
Yep.
Appeals.
Yep.
For a
Okay.
petition.
So the variance can vary.
The very,
Variance.
You bet.
Okay, the next number of pages are really just changing the names of the districts under the section of districts, changing the BNR to the C1, taking out the old purpose, which really didn't say much. And we worked long and hard on these purposes, and they do reflect the purposes in the master plan and the freedom plan. So we are comfortable that these are part of our implementation strategy for the plans in that they reflect what was in the plan regarding the land use definitions that then translate to the zoning. So as you'll see, for each one of these, you have a new purpose and intent, a little applicability section, and then a reference to the principal uses that directs you to the use table, and then many, many pages of strikeout language that has been replaced by the use table. And that really continues through,
To the use table page.
well, except for, not to, do you want me to go over employment campus separately?
Yeah, let's do
Yeah.
employment.
So really, that goes through the I-2 zone on page 30, I believe. And then you have the employment campus district. Oh, mine's a little different.
Mine starts on page 38, it's the employment campus.
Okay, the new employment campus, right.
So just to be clear, everything's struck out with the exception of the new purpose and intent for each of the 5 categories.
Yes, and a little bit of in the applicability as well, just changing the name again from BNR to C1.
Right.
And then pointing, as Mary said, to the table.
Where's the definition for C1? What page is that on?
Page 8.
It's hard to,
It is.
It says C1 commercial low-intensity district. The purpose of the C1 is to provide locations for small scale. And you'll see it's very similar to the land use definition that's in the Freedom Plan.
And that may be something, if you want to go district by district and see if you're comfortable with these new purposes.
I think it's fair to do.
Okay. As Linda said, that first one's on page 8. The planning commission also worked long and hard on these as far as what they wanted it to include. So there was a lot of discussion about these.
So you've taken out all of the principal uses.
And we've put them in that table
In the
format
table.
that we've discussed.
Right.
So that now a person can just go to the table, find their use. It will tell them at the end of the table, I mean, we'll get to that, if it's defined, and then they can compare it. That's the ease of it, is they can compare it to the other commercial and industrial districts, whereas they used to have to page
I
through
see.
to each district.
So, help me out, so C1, I see the definition, purpose intent. Where is the table associated with C1?
The table associated with all of them begins on page 41.
Okay,
But that is, again, that's for all 6 districts that we'll be discussing.
So in C1, we come down back and forth here, so between C1 and C2 here is, C1 it says, providing goods and services primarily serving residents in surrounding neighborhoods. So you're not allowing any internet sales in that C1 district.
I'm sorry?
No internet sales, someone can't have that on C1.
So I'm thinking, I don't think we listed it separately.
That certainly isn't the intent.
Yeah.
I would say with all of these, we found exceptions. Even like with the C1, not usually with expanded hours of operation, but you could have a convenience store that does have expanded hours of operation. So these were general descriptions, and as you go through the use table, there'll be exceptions to them, such as possibly the internet sales.
Now, one question, when you're talking internet sales, there's 2 different parts of it. There's just the sales office, where you have a whole bunch of people sitting around a computer, taking orders and placing them. And then you have a distribution site somewhere else where they put all stuff together. Usually it's the way that works.
So what if I have my own business, I'm
Mhm.
a couple people, but I sell to the people in my neighborhood, but I also have an online site.
That's, we're getting back, that's residential.
That would be a residential.
Residential.
Right.
In
But
the
no,
resident,
Wait, I'm looking at the definition when I said surrounding neighborhoods, that's why I put that in, not at my house.
well,
Okay?
just so you know, if you can have internet sales from your house as an accessory use. It does require a hearing to get approval for it, but then you can't keep any retail or any stock at the house.
Right,
you're just running the site and doing the sales. Everything else is coming from somewhere else. And that's, like I say, allowed in the residential areas. In a commercial, if you wanted to do something like Amazon, they came in and wanted to do just their internet sales, I mean, there are usually two separate buildings, and one's just an office building with people working in it. So,
So if I'm in C1,
Like a
I would
phone
be
call
able to
center,
do, online sales.
Mhm.
C1. That's no problem, okay.
So again, I think to this point, we're not defining things here, we're just saying what is the general purpose and intent, so they're not clear. I don't think we need to have all of that in there to be allowed to do something.
You certainly could go to the use table
Yeah.
then and find out if you would be allowed to do that. So
More
C2
questions
is
on
on,
C1?
oh, I'm sorry.
No.
Just wanted to point out C2 is on page 13, and C3 is page 17.
The, as you defined C1, 2, and 3, I mean, are there any, I guess, dramatic changes to these definitions? That, like alarms that are being set off when you're making these changing definitions? Or are they not just becoming more, I guess, responsive to what can be put in place or not?
Well, so they're all new because we didn't have these districts before.
Okay.
So the definitions are in the land use. What we did is we took the land use
Yeah.
definitions from the plans and brought them in as purposes and intents for each of the districts.
Okay.
And
Okay.
basically, and I think an easy way to think of it is that the C1, all this is already happening on the ground in BNR and BG.
Right.
It's kind of now taking the lower end of that BNR, and that's your C1, the higher end of BNR, and the lower end of BG, and making that the C2, and then the really high end of the BG becoming the C3. So I think the way that they've been categorized, I don't think there's any alarms or anything, so I don't think
Okay.
anything really major is triggered by these districts. That's what you're getting at, if I answered your question.
Yeah, and then the purpose of doing this is for better clarification, for less
Yes.
ambiguous, ambiguity.
And to also help cite,
Yeah,
property, land for these types of
Yep.
uses accordingly.
okay.
Because I think over time, we found it difficult, people are either, your squoze sort of in the middle, the ones in the
Yeah.
middle are
Yeah.
either too big for BNR, or they're too small for BG, I think, right?
Yes.
Staff's found.
Very much so.
As a result, they felt that this was a district, the commercial district really begged for that third intermediate area.
And if nothing else, sometimes it crossed over into that industrial, became some of our bigger commercial because it was allowed, so also kind of clearing that up.
This will make it better for dealing with constituents' concerns. They'll be able to get through this chart, because it's all Chinese to me.
Chart's a lot easier.
The chart's much easier, and you don't have to, as we're doing now, even look at this paging back and
Yes.
forth.
That's one of the big things about the old code is, and it's a problem we have in my office all the time. You gotta refer back to other sections of the code, and you're flipping pages to find, is it allowed or not?
And this is an issue that I've seen with constituents, and I just look blankly at them like I have no clue, and this is gonna be a really, really big help, so I appreciate it.
Thank you. Are you comfortable with the commercial 2? And then, so then the commercial 3 is on page 17.
Here's a question Commissioner Weaver brought up. Just put it on the price.
What you gonna ask? I know
I'm afraid to hear this.
And I'll roll
Page
over. to-
73,
and yours last.
recreational entertainment. My guess is he has some contact with this. Anyway, adult entertainment, business, massage, establishment, striptease business. I-2?
That is
That's where-
currently where it's
where it's
permitted in
currently
the
where it's
IG. We
located.
didn't touch that.
We did not, we didn't touch that at all.
Wouldn't that be commercial?
It had to occur in a zone, so we
Yes.
cannot not
can't
have
have
it.
Right, I understand
So
that.
I think historically, it was placed in the industrial zone.
And the
so-
intent was to probably
sensitive
limit
neighborhoods,
the
huh?
locations
Yeah.
for these establishments.
It's very hard.
And also keep them away from schools or other retail
Yeah, I
uses,
just-
you know, you're going to your grocery
Sounds
store
right.
and then having that type of
It-
establishment next to it.
It would be very hard in this county for an IR or an IG property to meet all the requirements
Right.
to have a
Yep.
sauce parlor there or.
Yep. I mean,
It's-
I understand the intent, and it's, whether we agree with that intent or not,
We actually,
You know.
believe it or not, we've actually had people call about having them, it's mainly down
Yeah.
on the southern part of the county. But,
on the southwestern part of the county.
well, no, actually.
Yeah, his district, not
It's
mine.
between the two.
You brought it up, not me.
Okay.
Let's move on.
Okay, what about bottling here? That's gotta be, distribution of soft drinks, alcoholic beverages, and here again, that's industrial. But what about if it's, I think a brewery or distillery?
Are you in the use table
They're
right now?
bottling also.
Are you in the use table?
We are.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, do you want to, do we want to
We're
start?
still
Well,
going through this.
Yeah.
We're still on the other one. You guys are skipping ahead.
A brewery, okay, and distillery also has to be in industrial?
Well,
But not-
let's go through the purposes and intents first,
Okay,
if you don't
okay, I'm
mind.
sorry, I'm jumping in.
But I like the enthusiasm.
Yeah.
That's good. We're gonna get through this almost today.
Well, you've done a lot of work,
We
and it
have.
shows. I mean, really, I mean, that's why I think you see that. We're going back and forth, the cost of a lot of the
Well, thank you.
content you're putting into this, so, thank you.
Is there any questions with C2 or do we want to move to C3? And again, this is now even more intense, the planned business parks, you know, regional destinations for shopping and entertainment.
For C3.
Correct. And so I would say this would be like all Kohl's, a big Target, a big Walmart type facility, BJ's, things like that.
Back in the first part.
The specific
Personal.
example, Liberty Exchange,
Yes.
that's in a C2?
No, currently it's industrial, but the recommendation is a C3 for that.
Regardless, is Liberty Exchange, I mean, is there any change to what they would have to do? Either being a industrial or,
Actually, it's more appropriate for them. Currently, they're in the industrial and they have some percent restrictions on the types of more service space that they can have. This would actually allow more flexibility
okay,
for that.
I like that answer.
Yes, and once we get to the, you know, once these are adopted, you know, then that even adds more for the ability to have the breweries, distilleries.
And C1, C2, C3, is there any restrictions in any of them on size of buildings that can go in there as long as they meet the setbacks?
Yes, there are size restrictions, so.
For retail and service?
Yes. Sorry, we just keep saying
Oh,
that. Yeah,
sorry,
no,
sorry.
you're right, you're right. That's a good clarification. So again, that C1 for the retail and service, we set up to 10,000 square feet, which is just like the B&R currently.
Right, okay.
And then C2 up to 60,000, but then you can go to the BZA and ask for to even expand beyond that up to 100,000. And then the C3, 60,000 and greater, and the size would be limited by the size of the site that you're building
Just the
on.
setback?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And then again, moving on to the I1, the light industrial district. And again, the intent too, as you've seen kind of throughout this, is in some ways trying to eliminate those pass-through uses, some of the overlapping things that we have had in the past that have made, in some ways, our industrial restrictive developed commercially. That's how we had the old Walmart on 1320 Liberty Road. That was actually zoned industrial, but they were able to do a Walmart. So kind of changing the way that the zones behave.
Now, if you went to a, because what's allowed now is what you said, if I was getting industrial and I want to put something less than industrial on it, I could do that right now. But if I still bought industrial land and I want to put something less on that, do I have to go to BCA to do that now? Because of the new code?
Excuse me. How would we
If-
want to work that out?
like I say, currently there are some business uses that are allowed in the industrial zoning districts, and you have to go before the Board of Zoning Appeals to get that approval. So,
So even with these defined the way they are, you still have the option to go to Board of Zoning Appeals and put something else on there.
It depends on the use.
Depending on the
Again,
use,
these
yes.
purposes aren't really defining what you can do, they're more describing it and reflecting the master plans.
Right.
So you always have to go to the table of uses to
Okay.
see what you could do, and in some cases, the less intense use is still permitted,
Right.
especially by
Right.
conditional use. So it really depends on the use.
Hotels. You know, there's big hotels and small hotels. There are different services, you know, for different communities. We have the ability and flexibility to put hotels in different zoned areas that are for large, you know, industrial and,
So they would be allowed in the C3,
Right.
and then as an industrial park in the I1, and then in the employment campus as
Okay.
well.
okay, that's good. Yeah, that's what we want. Okay.
I too also.
I too.
For what it's worth,
yeah.
I'm not sure anybody would.
Industrial.
They're not allowed in industrial zones.
No, but they can if it's in an
the-
industrial.
in the
I understand
park,
that, I
yeah.
understand that.
In the park. So that's it for the zone. So the beginning on page 38, I'm sorry, 41 is the use tables.
I
Well, did we
apologize,
wanna talk
the
employment campus?
Oh, sorry.
Employment campus is new.
Yeah.
So,
Jumping ahead, I apologize. That starts on page 38.
okay, thanks.
And Paige, not to put you on the spot, but we really did work with economic development. They had a base zone of this employment campus drafted, and it was, again, that overlay, not a primary zoning category. And so they had a lot of input on how, we used a lot of what was drafted as the basis to develop this zoning district. And the idea is to provide for a more higher quality, cohesively developed, employment-based area. So it would be a little bit of the industrial, industrial light, and a little bit of that commercial 3, but it would allow for, you know, some of the higher-end businesses that we would want to seek for employment and higher-end employment services and attracting them to that area. So that's really the primary principal reason we developed this. And we had some really good opportunities on the maps to have find land to provide that. So this is all new language in the code for this, starting on page 38, going to page 40.
At the end of 40.
Yep, to the end of 40,
Yeah.
thank you, Mary. And then even outlining, you know, green spaces, lighting, landscaping, the requirements for outdoor storage, signage, again, to convey that cohesiveness of the site.
How many employment campuses are currently out there that you're zoning in the county?
Well, we have them land use designated, so we don't have them actually zoned. But from the master plan, we had 3 different areas.
Okay.
Just north of Mount Airy, we're kind of contiguous to what would be in the Mount Airy employment campus area where the Harrison and Lake Shear property
Right.
is located. The Delaney properties, as they're known as, off of Clee Mill and the Eldersburg area. And then just south of the city of Westminster along 97, southeast of the community college, there's a large tract of land that was identified in the
By
master
Bellers?
plan.
Okay.
And then coming up 140 on the north side, if you're coming east, right around the landfill area as well.
Okay.
Sorry, and Gerstel property.
And Gersta?
Yeah, the Gerstel
So
property.
behind the academy?
Yes. Well, actually, the whole, that whole
The
site.
whole-
And to the east of it too, right?
Yeah, the whole, yep, the whole thing.
One of the thoughts about the employment campus was we were trying to create that more aesthetically pleasing campus, similar to McDonough down in Owens Mills. And next to Gerstel,
Right.
that was kind of what we were going after with this.
So
Okay.
you get input from Gerstel for that, because I'm just curious, because that's exactly what they want to do.
Exactly.
They want to make that McDonough.
They have talked about
Yes.
it.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, they have talked about it. the McDonough campus is gorgeous, and we've taken planning commissions for tours for probably 20 years now, at different times, just to, what do we want this to look like?
They have nice tables.
And the other thing with it was when we had looked at this like 20 years ago, it was an overlay zone, which was very difficult for developers to go through. And there were, oh gosh, I don't know, just a lot of public hearings. We talked to the guys from Maple Lawn, the developers from Maple Lawn, and they talked about the issues they had in like 27 public hearings. So putting it on the ground was really important for the development community to buy into it.
Maple Lawn has, as you know, has come a long ways, and St. John's doing very well there. And so, I mean, it was worth their fight. It was worth their commitment to it.
Greenbaum, we had actually talked with Greenbaum.
Well, he could more of the housing, but yeah.
Yes.
But
And the
the
smaller part of the commercial.
correct. Okay.
Paige, also, I don't know if you know the answer to this question, but when it's a primary zone as opposed to an overlay, is it easier for financing too for these developers when they do come in? Because I know that's
It's a
one
known,
thing.
yeah.
It's a known quantity that we hear a lot of as well.
It's risk adverse.
Yes. Making sure that they have the appropriate zoning on the ground for their financing is
Right.
important as well.
Because the overlay zone had these, according to some developers, 27 public hearings they had to go through, there's always this question, unknown, are we going to be able to pull this off? Now we're giving them a zone that in the zoning code allows that particular type of use in order to get the financing.
I mean, key to success though is making sure that it is in line with our vision, Mashpee, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that has got to be number one. What is the vision? How is this all aligned into our vision? And not piecemeal just because it's a nice piece of property, so, okay.
One thing to note about the employment campus that the planning commission had a lot of discussion about was the inclusion of some residential component. That is something you often see now in the more modern employment campuses, but really went back and forth on it, and I believe the percentage, it's under the mix of uses on page 40. Residential uses shall not collectively comprise more than 15% of the total area. And they have to be compatible with and supportive of the employment uses, which was language that the planning commission felt strongly about. They don't just want somebody putting some sort of housing in there. They wanted to be very cohesive with the rest of the development.
And the same too with the general retail, again, allowing for some of that as support service for the business park that's in there. So that way, you know, if someone wants to grab lunch or they need to go get their dry cleaning or do things like that, it's again available in that campus, but not something that would take over from its primary use, which is to attract employment.
On your solar energy conversion facilities, roof mounted and on canopy for parking lots, but there are also solar now you can put on sidewalks and walls and buildings that wouldn't be freestanding kind of things. Maybe you should put in there what you don't want and allow other things, because the way solar is moving forward, there's so many more ways to put solar in buildings and around buildings that wouldn't be, you know, the bank of solar standing on the side. And I think that's what you're trying to get away from in here.
Well, I think too, because these are more structures where, like, in the sidewalk would just be a material, on the building would just be a type of material used for the building, but not a structure impeding the parking requirements or things like that. That's why we thought it was important to discuss about the mounted parking solar facility.
So
But
you're
it
saying
would
maybe
preclude
limit-
that.
okay.
Well,
Yeah,
I
it
was
wouldn't
gonna
be-
say-
I would say it wouldn't.
Yeah, well, maybe would it be appropriate to put excluding materials used for construction? I mean, if we put something in there that clarified that,
Yeah, so people would know that.
how about that if we said
Right.
excluding those
in
that are
other
used
places,
in the
right.
construction of sidewalks or buildings? I mean, something
Yes.
that way that we separate them there and that. Is that something we could do?
Yeah, absolutely.
Would that be
Yes,
helpful,
yeah.
Commissioner? Okay.
Because I'm looking at that, I'm thinking, I can't make sidewalks, or can't put it on this, you know, make the side of the zone, you have solar. And you can actually do that nowadays.
Now, what about solar farms? Those big, you know, like outside college, I mean, the one. That's
That's on county ground.
Right, but I mean, is it is there a place for zones, you know, where solar farms can go or not? What's the-
Jay, do you want to speak to solar
Bas-
conversion?
Basically, solar farms, generating stations, basically, are allowed in the industrial
Okay,
districts. It's also allowed in the BG district, strictly solar
right.
generating plants. Otherwise, every place else in the county, they're not allowed, except for accessory uses to the property. If you have a farm that you can put some on a farm, for that's farmed use, but currently you can't sell it to other people, it's for your use.
Is community use of solar in here anywhere?
No. No.
Is it gonna be?
That'll be part of the residential conversation, right?
Okay.
Yes, and there's a lot of stuff still being determined
Okay.
about community solar.
Solar, yeah.
Right.
In the
And
state,
nothing's been-
yeah.
State level
So
hasn't
that
been
might
settled.
determine for us
Okay.
Solar farm, solar, whatever you call it.
energy conversion.
Yeah, that thing. On farms, can only be used for
That property, that farm.
property.
It's considered accessory use.
So much of it.
And that's for any property in the county. You can have an accessory use of solar panels to generate electricity for your use, and any extra that you have gets sold back to the grid.
Right.
But you can't sell it to all your neighbors. That's the community solar
But on
program.
a farm, I believe we allow them to put as much solar as they need to run the farm.
What we allow currently is the total square footage of all the roofs on the property is the total square footage of solar panels you can have.
I thought we changed that. I thought we changed that to allow them to put as much as they needed to run their farm.
Is there value for an incentive for these type of complexes, like in the farm area, or they would be like?
Well,
not
the trouble
working?
is, the problem there is they come in and offer 10,000 an acre for a solar farm.
Right.
It takes production ground out, and most of the people are opposed to that.
But not all the property is farmable. I mean,
There's places that
Yeah.
wouldn't be, and they just say if it's used for the on-farm production plus a certain percentage overreach, and that was it. That's the way it's put together. That's
And
to
I-
eliminate the competition.
And actually, I think there's a lot of legal wranglings or legal things that are taking place right now, which actually may take it out of our hands.
Yes.
The large solar farm operations. So we may not, in the future here, have a
Have a
choice
choice.
whether we allow them or not, depending on how they're regulated at the federal, state level.
because what I'm saying is how to incentivize folks, I won't say to do the right thing, but to make the most of their property, you know, and I was thinking about these solar farms, and that may be a use, but it's not, you know. Okay.
You can start with
Sure.
plastic bags and work away. Straws, plastic bags, styrofoam, and, you know, just like building blocks.
And certainly, I mean, it's allowed in basically in the industrial zone, which is what we're talking about today. And when we get to the agricultural
Yeah.
zone, if you wanted to change it,
Yeah.
if all this stuff that's going on in the state and the federal about what it actually is, whether it needs to go to public service commission and other things, whether it preempts zoning or not. If it stays sort of as it is and we do get to regulate it, you can certainly change those,
Okay.
those rules at that time.
Just before we step away from here, I want to make sure as proposed, you can't do the ground mounted in the employment campus. This is the conversion facility. You can do it on the roofs, but you
Right.
can't do it on the
Right.
ground. I just want to make sure everybody, okay, I just want to make sure that's clear before we step away
And
from
the
here.
parking, we said you could do.
Yes, yes.
We're gonna go through the news table, right?
I
Yes,
just
yes,
wanna-
absolutely. Is everyone still awake and with us?
Sorry.
All right. So page 41 starts the use tables, and again, it has all of the three commercial employment, industrial employment campus districts all together. And then we did it by the land use category, a subcategory, and a description. As well as if there's an additional regulation that was involved, we cite parts of the code where that additional regulation can be found. And then we did it as P for primary principle, C is conditional, X is prohibited and NA is not applicable.
And there's also on that first page another legal things that apply to it when interpreting the use table. That is pretty standard in other codes that use this format.
So just starting with ag, again, as we said, it's permitted in all districts. But then some of the secondary types of agriculture that aren't exactly farming would be the agricultural resource laboratories and facilities. They're prohibited in the C1 and C2, conditional in the C3 and I1, and then permitted in the industrial 2 and the employment campus. So whatever pace you want to go on, however, if you want to look at each section individually, if you have questions. And we debated ad nauseam many of these things, and Mary has a binder of minutes that we kept from each of our discussions so we could refer back to why these decisions were made. And sometimes we had made a decision at one point during the process and then talked each other into something else, and because it made sense.
And again, our goal was not to change things that weren't broken. I mean,
Right.
if we couldn't think of a good reason to change the existing way, we didn't want to do that and possibly create problems for
Do you
people.
talk a little bit about the rules of engagement, about how some of that stuff, some of the, if it was already there and it wasn't an issue, we kept it, things like that.
Yeah.
What were some of the other discussions?
Well, actually, to that point too, as far as the non-conformings
Yeah,
and
trying
not
to make
affecting
it-
people's property, I don't know, the 3 commissioners who were here know this, but last year at this time, county staff, Tom's staff and our staff went out and we looked at every piece of commercial and industrial property in the county. We wrote down what it was, how it was being used, we checked what it's currently zoned, we checked what its future land use designation was, so we would know if we were creating any problems. And we actually found some problems, and we corrected those.
We went
So-
back and had discussions and
Right,
corrected
and
those.
when we realized we were affecting, for instance, one that comes to mind was, we weren't going to allow car dealerships in the C2. We thought that's a big use, you know, what you see here on the corner. And then we realized there's all these small car dealerships all over the county, and we realized we were going to be affecting those, which was something when we were doing this as an exercise in our office, we didn't really know as much. So we did come back and we I
That
would
was
say-
quite ambitious.
We did.
It was quite an effort.
Yes, we went, this time last year, teams of us went
Teams,
out
yes.
and we had, made quads on maps and went through and had notes taken just to make sure. And that was one of the biggest things actually that did stand out was we were thinking car dealership, a big, Coons or,
Yeah.
Sheehy or something like that.
Small ones.
Right, but not the
Used car
small,
dealers.
used car lots that really are scattered throughout the county. So making sure then that we weren't unintentionally not including them in these districts.
Okay, you have all these changes, C1, 2, 3, employment campus. What is the economic impact to the county and our future as far as dollars and cents do you think it's gonna take to make, if this all happens as designated?
Well, we didn't do an economic development impact study, but the hope is we're making more economic opportunities available. With creating an employment campus zone, that's gonna allow for more economic opportunity. Modernizing the code will allow for us not to have to do text amendments to bring new businesses in, with the distilleries, with the breweries. But as far as, being able to measure, we have that's a huge undertaking and a huge study.
Do we have any forecast on it, and what is it gonna cost the county to get to this point? If these, we come in and we change C1, 2, and 3, and we know the properties where they're gonna be, or there, what's going to be our part in far as impact on our budget, and also the positive side of it, the tax implications coming in are possible.
So
is
there's
that-
two things. So one is the cost benefit analysis based on the zoning. The other is what is the direct cost as far as administrative and staff time goes. I mean, we have not put in our assessment on staff time, but it's a lot of resources. A lot of resources we've already budgeted for as part of our work program. To get this done, we've already spent money that we already have budgeted to give out the cards that we marketed, remember, to all the citizens that we mailed out. And much of it's being done in-house, so to try to keep costs down.
Well, those costs I understand, but I'm just looking at the cost of the county to infrastructure to get these things to happen. What is going to be the county's budget implications, I guess, on this if
So-
it happens? Do we have any forecast of that goes with this?
Well, I would say, unfortunately, that look should have been done when the master plan was done. Because what is happening now is this work is implementing the master plan, all right? And so putting this in place is doing what that master plan had laid out.
But this
And-
should have been done with the master
Well,
plan, and we didn't do it.
I understand.
So
I'm
now-
not disputing anything. I'm just saying, though, you're creating the implementation mechanism for the master plan right here. I personally think the commercial industrial parts of this are going to improve things. I mean, that was our goal, that was our charge, pretty much, and that's what's happening. Now, this is not going to change any of the amount of industrial or whatever that you put on the master plan at this point in time. Now, there may be people who come in and want to change their zoning as part of this process if you allow it. But right now, this is just taking what you have put into the master plan and adding detail to it and adding specifics to it in order for staff to implement the
As we
wishes of that master
get
plan.
down deeper into this is gonna drive a lot of our budget. Some of it is gonna dictate some of our budget coming in, so I'm just
Yeah.
worried about, can we?
Hopefully on the positive side more than the
Well,
negative.
I'm hoping, but do we have any idea where it's gonna be? We should have some kind of forecast of economic implications of doing this.
Well, I could speak to be developed properties, like the North Carroll Business Park or Mount Airy Business Park or Delaney property, anything that hasn't been developed yet. I mean, certainly we go in and look at it and what is the cost of the infrastructure and what will the economic impact be? So we do that in terms of land to be developed, but I think with this, it's what's already on the ground and just further defining it. I don't know that there would be a different impact because if the infrastructure is already there, it's already there. All
It's
we
already
did was
there.
open up a couple more, uses
But if we
perhaps that are
change
allowed. there.
designations or zoning, it will have impact on the county budget. Maybe positive or negative, we have to look at it both ways, and I just want, we need to have that with this as far as the forecast. I know it's not gonna be perfect, but it's just, how is this going to help or
I
it's gonna
think-
cost us in our
I
budget?
really just don't think there's that many I mean,
Correct.
especially with these, 6 categories. The big change with regard to zoning is freshening it, tightening it, making it more usable for us and for the people out in the world. We're not really changing. There are very few, it's those folks that really fall down into that C2 category that are going to have any kind of change, because they're not BNR and they're not BG. They're sort of that mix. Everything else is really already done. There could be some properties that have when the master plan was looked at 4 years ago, and the Freedom Plan, you did this with the Freedom Plan, you made some changes specifically to the Freedom Plan in order to limit the impacts on the county. As one of the reasons I know you spoke about specifically. And those things were looked at when the master plan was done too. So if there were any changes in land use designations that now become reality because of zoning, they are probably becoming reality as a result of zoning because that's what's already on the ground. It is not going to be staff's recommendation ultimately that, you can do it a different way, but the recommendation will be that if it's not yet developed property, then they have to go through a process. They just don't get automatically rezoned. And the reason is that is one particular aspect of why staff's going to recommend you do it that way, so that you can have a full look at whether or not this is right to be rezoned. Because if you have a piece of what appears to be ag land now, on the ground, it's ag land, there ain't nothing on it, but a few cows. But it's a land use designation is industrial. And somebody comes in and applies for that to be industrial. We would be recommending someone have to come in and apply for it to become industrial rather than just automatically becoming industrial. Because then you get to look at whether or not you feel the county infrastructure is ripe to allow that change. Did I explain that correctly?
Excellent explanation.
So it's not, certain things are automatic, certain things will become automatic. You are BNR, more likely not gonna, well, let me use the I's. You are I1, you are light industrial, you will become I1. Those are gonna be pretty much automatic. But then there are those others that are going to be more decisional later on.
Well, let me rephrase that.
Sure.
Looking at C1, 2, 3, and IR or whatever, what percentage of our future budget could be impacted coming in as far as revenue from these changes? How much, I mean, it could be 10%, 12, move to 12, 13, is there, what percent of land use would be tied up and potentially impact our operating budget?
So, in these early days, probably virtually no impact, because again, what we're recommending is that those that are not already operating this way, whatever this way is, don't get automatically changed until they go through a review process. Once they go through the review process, they could have a positive impact on revenue. They could have a negative impact on service production, that we have to provide service. So it just sort of depends, and then you guys get to decide whether you allow that to happen or not, based on that information. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so a couple things on my mind. One, the land that's not developed now,
right,
and being categorized, will make it clearer for development appropriately into one of these categories. So it would have a positive impact, because it then becomes more marketable, and we can have that discussion with those that want to occupy that property for whatever,
right, exactly,
in accordance with whatever zoning. My understanding, the intent here is to again be less ambiguous, clearer in definitions, in defining all these categories that are in line with our vision and the master plan.
Yes.
Yeah, there may have been a little bit of cart before the horse, or a lot of cart before the horse. Regardless, the master plan is there. We understand it. We have a vision. This now is designed to zone the properties and be much clearer for the use of properties. I mean, that's overall what we're doing here. Okay, and I mean, because I understand what you're saying.
As we put this on the map, we
Right.
should be able to see some, maybe future, at least some idea of.
Absolutely. And, you know, there's properties, especially with the employment center, you know, category campus, opportunities that are in front of us. And, you know, having those conversations, now that we know it'll be zoned as employment campuses, these are the categories, you know, that can go into it. So, yeah, I think this is a much cleaner tool to help us, you know, have those conversations and discussions on especially the properties that are not developed yet.
Right.
The question I do have, though, is with these definitions now defined, these categories, are there businesses out there that have to either be worried about how they now fit within the zoned areas, or have to actually, you know, uproot, and that could be a concern? So, I mean, or is everybody happy, you know, that's as far as the business location or wherever they are? Does that make sense?
We'd
I'm
love to
asking?
think everybody's happy.
I would love to think
We're
that.
sure that's
Your
not
grandfather.
Well, yeah, I hate the grandfather, but yeah, grandfather clause, but are there businesses that are now gonna be up in arms, and we're gonna be getting phone calls, hey, you're now changing definitions, and we don't fit in this zoned area.
So that was not the intent, to make anyone non-conforming, we didn't seek out to do that. Were there maybe a non-conforming? Absolutely.
Well, are there? I mean, we should know that as we're defining this. I understand it's definitely not
Right.
intent to be discomfort to any constituent.
Mhm.
But when decisions are made, that is a risk associated with those decisions, we should now know, especially us, who are those constituents,
Sure.
businesses in our communities that now have that big question mark, associated with how these are defined.
I don't think it's our intent, if we go through with this and someone has a business that's in this particular parcel and now it's been that we're gonna ask them to leave or anything, that's not our intent.
Well, that's
Okay.
not how it would work anyway.
They would
Right.
become a
We're gonna let
non-conforming.
we're gonna let that business stay there and be
Right.
that business.
Yes.
If we
Okay.
have to work around that, we work around it.
That's great.
We're
And they can
keeping
even
every-
expand.
right.
Yes.
Yeah.
But we
Okay.
have to
We're
have
not
that
trying-
spelled out.
Right, I mean, if that comes up, and I don't know.
That's
any
couldn't
by
spots
law
that
require
are like that.
Okay.
Right, we're
Right,
not-
no,
That's not
no.
what we're trying to do.
Okay. No, I
But
appreciate it. I just need to understand that.
But,
We can get
so
that
you
nowhere.
all understand, it's, it's really important, and we've worked hard on a draft letter when we get to this part of about trying, once, you guys are comfortable with the text, then we start talking about, okay, what the next step is. One aspect of the next step is to communicate with every parcel owner, every property owner who is affected by these six new zoning categories. They'll all receive a letter, if they, with the new recommended zoning in it. They will all have an opportunity to say yay, nay, I don't understand. The nay is, is more of a I don't understand, or I think you're wrong for some reason. And we'll work through them. We believe that we've done our due diligence.
Yes.
I'm sorry I had to leave the room, but as I was leaving, I heard Linda, I think it was Linda, talk about having done an extensive,
Yes, we did.
search of the county nooks and crannies, as really getting our inventory right
Okay.
of land out there right. So we feel fairly confident that the folks that are going to have their zoning redefined from what it is now to one of these new the majority will be seamless, but no, and so we will work through on an individual basis with each of those that feel that there's some kind of error or have questions or whatever it may be.
And there's also, and then that was one of the things when we were driving around. Our idea too was not to have this be punitive or penalize
Right.
anyone, because there might have been uses out there that we saw that were commercial, but they weren't appropriate. They shouldn't have been doing what they were doing anyway, and we weren't reporting that. So it's very hard to determine who's truly non-conforming. They're legally acting on their property now that we'd be making legitimately non-conforming, and how many people were actually had a business on their property that was not legitimate to begin with. So that would be interesting when we send out the letters to see how things come back.
Right, because we anticipate there's somebody out there who thinks they're retail.
Right.
And we think they're industrial.
Right.
And, because they look industrial to us, and we don't know, and so they come back to us and say, oh, really, we're retail, so,
Right.
that may be a bad example, I don't know,
Right.
but
No,
that's
certainly
actually
one
Yeah.
Terrible.
But anyway, so that, it's definitely our intention
Okay.
to work through each of
Correct.
those on their own. Hopefully they're the minority.
I have
Yes.
one question. From what I'm reading, the trend around the country is to do away with drive-through restaurants. Or did we talk about that at all? Taking that out of the zone?
We're talking about the C one too.
Like
Do
some-
away with drive-through restaurant. Well.
Like
go into it.
McDonald's and-
Yeah, well, not the restaurant itself, but the drive-through part of it.
Really?
Really? Because I see
Why?
Dunkin' Donuts wanting the drive-throughs. Like, I mean,
Well,
like
they
that's
all
a new
want 'em.
trend.
They all want them, but there are
Starbucks.
a lot of communities that do not want them any longer.
Huh.
Well,
What's
we
the
did
reason?
not allow them in the
Right.
C1
C1.
district. They're only allowed in the C2 and C3.
You don't want to hear the reasoning because you don't like the plastic bag thing, so I'm not even going to go for the reason behind it. But.
Let's move on to something else.
But, no, okay, I just was wondering if there's any conversation about that when you were doing this.
Well, I would say, Clay, you can jump in on
Yeah,
this,
I mean,
that
that
the
would
trend
be
we're
the-
probably seeing here in Carroll County
It's
is
the opposite.
more of
Yeah,
them
well,
and
once
more
you-
doubling
so
lanes, and
convenient.
also that they can
But you-
handle
then
more
you have everybody
capacity.
sitting out there with their cars running, waiting for to get their food and so forth, which
Right.
is why communities don't like it.
And it backs up on the roadways. I mean, we've seen, and that's been a
Which is a
complaint
huge
when a
issue.
a drive-through comes into a community.
I remember years ago, this county had a drive-through liquor store down the corner of 26 and 32.
I remember that.
Had one at University, Maryland College Park.
Yeah, they have them
Right on the edge of
College
I
campus.
think in North Carolina, they have the brew-through where you.
No kidding.
Yep.
Yeah, South Carolina too.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of Lewistown?
Mhm.
Just goes right through.
Do you want to still continue, or is this? We have a lot of use table to go through. There's.
You wanna chunk that out next time?
6
Yeah.
pages, 5-6 pages.
'Cause this is really important. I mean, this
Yeah.
is.
You gotta be fresh-minded for this.
This is the big deal here, because this is what you're saying people can and can't do.
Yes.
So it is rather important.
No drive-through restaurants.
So again, maybe
I see
for the
discussion
next
for you.
time we
The drive-through
meet-
restaurant was one of the ones that we debated
Yes.
and discussed
And we came back.
extremely heavily.
All right, so there was some discussion on it.
Absolutely.
Because of the use and the intensity of that use. And through the site plan process, we see that as a very intense use.
And I think we went back and forth even with the C1 about having it, not having it, because I've seen in other parts of the country, almost like standalone, like the old Kodak shacks that you would have, turning into a little coffee shop that as people are going to work in the morning, they pop in, get their cup of joe, and then they're out, and that's a low intensity, small type of building. You can see being in a C1, but then all of the issues that come with the traffic, so that was one thing trending that we went back and forth on. Would it be nice to have a little community coffee shop with a drive-through? But then what other larger issues would it have for the
You're not old
neighborhood?
enough for Kodak shacks. Come on.
There's one of those down in St. Michael's, and it's jammed every
Yeah.
They turned an old
Like a
photo.
little Java, yeah.
Remember the old, what was it called?
Well, the Kodak shacks, but the
Yeah.
Yeah.
coffee shops, yeah, that's
Yeah.
the big thing.
So well, let's end here then, I guess, for the day is the sense I'm
I
giving.
think so, yeah.
And then we'll come back at our next meeting and try to complete the use table, and we'll come up with the new language that you'd like to see for those other districts. And I apologize for not feeling well today. I will take
You
my
did phenomenal, you
echinacea.
and your
I think you
team.
can apologize to them.
You'd never know it. I know you did.
No,
So,
exactly.
Guys, very
Thank
much.
you all. Thank you
lot
for
of
your
work with
patience.
this.
We need an official.
Did you recess those things? 'Cause-
We just recessed, we have to adjourn.
All right.
Second.
I got some things.
Thank you very much.
Y'all did awesome.
Bye.
Thank you to the team.
Nice spending